The Curse of the Candle by Rarest of All. Can you remember the day you turned 10? The day you came of age to care for your first own Pokémon so very long ago? I do. Me and my team even won a few badges, but I was not destined to become the champion. My dearest Arcanine became older and developed health issues. Seeing my loyal friend suffer was the last thing I wanted to do, so I gave up fighting. I was 30 years old by that time and we moved to a small town on the coast. A peaceful, quiet place for me to live and for Arcanine to enjoy his retirement. He had another 5 years. Wonderful years. I was lonely after he passed away, but not for very long. A shop owner asked me out for dates and we ended up getting married. I loved him so much, and I loved Harriet, my beautiful, cute little daughter. Since I had been a trainer, and her father continued to work in his Pokémon supply store, it was almost unavoidable that my sweet little angel would grow up with Pokémon as well. We got her a Nidoran for companionship at her 7th birthday, and a nice well-behaved Vulpix to keep her warm when the nights were cold. And yet, she often returned home with injured or lost Pokémon she found outside, begging me for permission to keep them till they recovered. I could hardly resist the hopeful look in her big green eyes. One day she was holding a Litwick in her tiny hands. Its yellow eyes were half closed, and it looked pale. It was rainy outside, and the sounds of thunder could be heard from the horizon behind her as she stood at the door. I have never liked ghost Pokémon, although I know a lot of trainers that are very convinced they are a sure tick to the Pokémon League when trained correctly. To train a ghost Pokémon, you have to quit being afraid first, I was told, but I must admit this was an obstacle I could never overcome. The Litwick looked weak, and its blue flame on its head was almost gone. I was sure it would not survive if I forced her to put it back where she found it, but something in the back of my head told me that this would have been the smaller of two evils. You must know our town holds a tradition out of old times, saying that it would bring bad luck over you and your family to blow out the light of a candle without saying a little prayer. Harriet cried but obeyed me, or at least I thought so. I said the prayer and went back to cook dinner, only to discover later that she smuggled the Litwick inside her room. Litwicks feed their blue flames off of human life energy. Not so much that it could affect you, usually not worse than a Weedle's sting. Nevertheless, I watched her raise it, worried. It grew and became stronger. It was more agile and hated nothing more than being separated from her. But the weeks passed and my husband and I slowly gained more trust in the little guy. How could we not? It got along perfectly with all of her other Pokémon and never caused any trouble, but the doubt I felt at our first encounter never vanished completely. Maybe my judgment was unfair. Maybe it was behaving perfectly normal and I was just feeling strange about it, because I had never raised a Litwick before. This one evening my daughter was sitting in front of the TV, watching the quarterfinal of the Pokémon League tournament, cheering excitedly for her favorite trainer. Litwick was not cheering, neither was it watching, at least not the fight. It sat on her shoulder and observed me. I went to the other side of the room to open a window and let some fresh air in, noticing that it still looked at me funny. "Mom, don't do that. Litwick dislikes wind. It'll make his flame flicker," Harriet protested. "Well, bring it into another room then," I answered. I watched how she stood up and brought her Pokémon back into her room, but the very moment she tried to close the door between her and Litwick, we both heard that strange cry. It hadn't even sounded like something a Litwick could generate when angered or tortured long enough, but the sound was just awful loud. It came from all directions, and it hurt my ears so much I thought I was going to be deaf. I needed both of my hands to cover my ears. Harriet was the first to gather a clear thought and open the door. The scream stopped immediately. It was still sitting on the floor where she had put it down, doing nothing but lifting his little white arms to Harriet in expectation to be picked up again. I was still shaken. If you raise many Pokémon, you can eventually come over one or two that become overly attached to their trainer, but never ever had I witnessed a reaction like that. Harriet picked it up, cuddled it, and cheered it up. Also, I could see that it wasn't sad anymore, now that I think of it. It had never looked happy either. Its eyes always remained the same neutral, half-closed state as when I first saw it. My husband attached long robes to all of our door handles so that Litwick would be able to enter and leave room whenever it wanted. It didn't repeat that strange scream, so we kept it. A while later, I forced myself to quit thinking about it. The cake I just baked that evening was finished, so I took it out of the oven and turned around. Then my vision crossed the little yellow eyes, not on the floor where Litwick used to walk around, but at my height of my face. I dropped the cake in shock. "Mom! Mommy, look! Litwick evolved into a lamprant," Harriet shouted excitedly, grabbing one of its arms. "Get it out of my kitchen!" I shouted angrily at both of them. It might not have done it on purpose, but I had gotten so jumpy just having it live next to that thing. My days had become very stressful since we shared a roof with it. I took the upper layer of the cake and placed it on a plate out on the lawn for the wild pidgeys, so it wouldn't be totally wasted. I swept the rest of it together and crossed the front yard to throw it into the trash can, when I noticed something at the edge of my view. The sound of flapping wings was nowhere to be heard, and when I looked around, the only thing I could see was a still untouched plate. I dropped the trash bag in the bin when I suddenly felt a piercing pain in the back of my right knee. I screamed and fell backwards onto the driveway, hitting my head on the cobbled paving. I tried to look up, but my vision kept blurring, revealing nothing but a pair of large, red, glowing eyes in front of me. The beast snarled while its round, dark body hovered over the ground. Its grim cry made me realize that I knew this Pokémon, a wild Shuppet. I dragged myself backwards, away from its fangs and who knows what else could have used to attack, back to the door. My husband came to my aid. He grabbed me and pulled me back up, but when I took a long look to the other side of the street, a cold shiver went down my spine, almost stunning me, in face of what must have been dozens pairs of red eyes opening one by one in the shadows. He slammed the door behind us while I was running to the window and took care of the blinds. Harriet was holding all her 3 Pokémon, fearfully pressing them to her chest while we called the local police station. Their swarm's aggressive moaning still came from the windows, depending on where they tried to break in. I ran into the basement and opened the dusty chest where I had stored the remaining parts of my trainer gear. I finally got a hold of an old, slightly rusty can of repel spray. There was nothing to give me a clue of how much of that stuff was left, so I covered Harriet's face with one hand in order to prevent her from inhaling it and applied it on her clothes with the other one, instead of trying to block all the door and windows with it. Vulpix, Nidoran, and Lampert looked for refuge inside of the clothes cupboards in my room to escape the smell. When the police arrived, the Shuppet had already started to disappear. Shuppets usually don't inhabit this region, so Officer Jenny obviously had a hard time to believe us when we told her what had happened. My husband brought as much repel spray as he could from the store and placed cans in every single room to prepare us, just in case. But that wasn't helping me sleep any better. Why ghost Pokemon? Why here, at our home? Lampert screamed one more time. It woke me up in the middle of the night. We jumped up and ran as fast as we could to my daughter's room. She was not there, only Vulpix and Nidoran, crouching themselves into a corner as small as they possibly could. Vulpix even wet itself. I saw light out of the bathroom, so I reached out for the door handle. It was so loud that we didn't even attempt to talk to each other. That loud, painful Pokemon's cry I remembered so well. I threw the door open and saw Harriet's lifeless body on the tiling, with Lampert hovering over her. Her eyes were wide open and she wasn't breathing anymore. "Why is it screaming?" I asked, even though I had already guessed the answer. They had been separated again. My husband ran out to call the next hospital for help, leaving me and Lampert alone. I don't have words to describe how I felt. There had been so many chances to get rid of it. So much time to come up with an explanation why it ran off that I could have told her. Now it was too late for any of it. It just continued to cry, without even getting the slightest bit exhausted. My hands felt numb, my heart raced, and I wanted badly to kill it. I grappled it roughly and dragged it into the bathtub. I filled it with water and drowned it, just drowned it. Its flame went out and its moaning was silenced immediately. It flailed around for what felt like an eternity. It looped its thin black arms around mine and stared at me. I wished it would have been angry or fearful at least. Although it didn't give me a single last emotion before it died, I let it go and it slowly sank to the bottom of the bathtub. The paramedics later told us that Harriet must have mistaken my blood pressure pills for cold medicine and therefore suffered a heart attack. It had been an accident. Guilt. So much guilt. What had I done? We took a taxi home because we were too agitated to drive. It rained, but there wasn't much traffic. My eyes were hurting me, for I had cried for hours now. Suddenly, our driver altered our course, and the car tipped over. We fell over the crash barrier and down a hillside. My pelvis was immediately crushed by the back of the car when it smashed to the ground with us. I reached out for my husband's arm, but I only touched in a pool of blood. I honestly couldn't tell if it was his or mine. I was too shocked to care. My shouts were swallowed by the dark forest that surrounded me. The pain was overwhelming, and I gave up torturing my throat in pathetic attempts to call for help, knowing I was miles away from the next populated city. Suddenly, I noticed a weak blue light in the distance before me. I wanted to close my eyes once more, knowing what kind of Pokémon shines blue. It came closer, and I barely recognized the shape of a chandelier with 5 wavering flames. It looked at me with the same emotionless face I had gotten so used to. It reached out for me and started pushing one of his flames deep into my eye socket. I opened my mouth to scream, but as soon as I did, it grappled my tongue, pulled it far out, and burned it as well. I felt every single layer of skin burning, crackling, and giving way to the one beneath it. I begged for Chandelure to let me go. It didn't seem to notice what was left of my voice by that time, since my screams of agony were nothing more than a quiet whimper between coughing up blood and fighting for air to keep breathing. I had no more hope to escape and prayed mentally to faint, even to die after a few more moments, but it wouldn't let me. The first flame had already eaten its way deep into my skull, and my cheeks were already pierced. It burned so hot that even parts of me it wasn't touching directly slowly started to develop burns. They popped up in secluded small riles of a stinky, slimy liquid on my arms, my face, and my breast as a strand of my hair somehow got into the flame he still mercilessly pushed into my eye. The fire spread all over me, from the small strand to the rest of my hair, which had now gotten consumed by the flames. My scalp felt hot, then dry, and then it began to rip. I would like to tell you that this was the end, but it went on and on and on, forever. That was Curse of the Candle. Final thoughts? A very good story that could have used a bit more work. First thing I want to point out is that English is not the author's first language, so that's why some of the sentence structure is quite odd. I'm not holding that against the author, since sentence structure is something that really has to be taught and is hard to learn on your own. Sentence structure being fixed is more up to the users peer editing it, and I think that they did a good job overall. However, there are a few lines that could have used quite a bit more work. I think that the bulk of the story was quite good and really held my interest. It was a unique approach that I haven't seen, and the twist of not just having the Pokémon be simply evil from the start was a welcome change. If there was any plot point that might have needed to be changed, it was the torture at the end. The killing is fine, but I feel like it would have been better if a lot of the torture was left up to the imagination. It often weakens a story to have highly detailed gore scenes, as it becomes less creepy and more gross-out horror. Keep in mind that creepy has an unsettling and worrying quality to it, and that a reliable way to achieve this is fear of the unknown. Things that we don't fully understand and don't know whether it's a threat or not, we often find creepy in life. Like a lot of deep-sea life that we see pictures of. We hardly know what it is, but it looks strange and foreign to us and thus often creeps us out. Describing exactly what happens in great detail can take the mystery away and instead just leave us feeling disgusted rather than creeped out. Either than that, though, I think it was overall a very enjoyable story. That's it for this week's Creepypasta. Tune in again next week when we tackle yet another story made and sent in by the fans with Bone Hunter. If you want to write your own story, help peer edit a story, or even just read the stories early, check out the description, where you'll find a link to the Creepypasta section of my forum. You'll also find a link to the playlist of every Creepypasta reading I've done. Please remember that if you want your story to be read on the show, you must stay active on your post on the forum as well as read the forum rules. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, sweet dreams.